Well, welcome in LSU fans back to the Go 24/7 podcast. My name is Bryce Koon, and if you're listening, you can't see who I'm talking to, but if you're on YouTube, we appreciate you. Make sure you follow us on all those platforms. It's David Woods of our UCLA site on 24/7 Sports. David, I know you said you're not making the trip to Baton Rouge, but I know that part of your staff is, as UCLA gets to set host to play LSU this weekend. Well, first off, David, welcome to the show, and we'll get into the game, but how kind of excited are you for this matchup on paper between two storied programs?
I mean, it was certainly an exciting one when it was first scheduled. I think just the home and home itself, 2021 being the first round of it, and then this one, very exciting in theory. I think the reality of the game that's going to be unfolding on Saturday, I think at recording time, I believe LSU is favored by 24.5 points. I don't think it's going to be the kind of game that maybe both fan bases would have wished. But at the same time, anything can happen. You know, it's a weirdly shaped ball and it can bounce funny ways. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I wish I was making the trip. Tracy Pearson from our site is making the trip, but that's a kind of a bucket list item, I think, for a lot of people in college football, is seeing a game in Death Valley, seeing a game at Tiger Stadium. And I think the fact that it's not a night game, a little bit diminishing. You know, you want Tiger Stadium at night, but all the same, I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
It should be. I mean, obviously, this game was announced as an afternoon kickoff here in the Central Standard Time. A lot of people were disappointed. People are still going to be packed out, but it's obviously LSU at night. I've only been on the beat. This is my second year, and it truly is something that you have to witness and one of those bucket list items. It definitely is. David, let's talk about this. I mean, I know a lot of fans kind of got maybe a glimpse at Big Ten Media Days, which I don't know if you guys are still getting used to saying that kind of thing, but they got a glimpse at Deshaun Foster and who this UCLA program might be. But just kind of let our listeners and viewers in of through the early portion of the season. You and I were kind of joking beforehand. Is there an identity of this team? Are they still trying to find it? And how would you characterize this 2024 UCLA team up to this point?
So I just want everyone to know, I'm going to preface this with, I'm going to be generous in my assessments and trying to be gracious. It's very much a work in progress. I don't think there's an identity yet. I think what you saw at Big Ten Media Day is the reality, and not, you know, Deshaun Foster is going to go up there and flub everything or whatever, but he's a first-time head coach who did not follow the traditional preparation paths for that position. Let's say that. He doesn't have coordinator experience on his resume. He wasn't being talked about as a head coach for any other position, had never interviewed as a head coach for any other position. So it's definitely a guy who's going to be learning on the job in a lot of ways. And some things is, you know, that every coach might understand. I have to give a prepared, 1 to 2 minutes at least of, it doesn't need to be much, but discussion points about my team to start off my session of Big Ten Media Day. That wasn't, something that he apparently, had a great handle on. So there's some of that stuff that I think indicates what we've seen through 2 games, where the team has looked, frankly, not very good. And it's not as if it's an untalented team. They were 29th in the 247 talent composite. There's some talented guys on this team who performed a lot better last year, and some transfers who came in who performed a lot better last year. So I think right now what we're seeing is major growing pains, and the hope is that it grows into something, that they become something, hopefully over the course of the year, but at least, show signs of it. But right now that's mostly just hope. It looked pretty bad against Hawaii, and then it didn't look any better, and in some ways worse, against Indiana.
Yeah, and you and I were just kind of talking off air about this, and I'll bring it, on air. We were talking about Indiana. I mean, look, they look like a well-coached football team, not one that went 3-9 last year, and they've got a first-year head coach in Kurt Signetti, very successful at his previous stop at James Madison. Where has is it a disconnect? Is there is it just not working out right now? Is this normal? What was the expectation level, I guess, brand new head coach for this fan base, and what would kind of be the temperature of that fan base, maybe heading into this ball game?
I think if you were assessing talent alone, I think you would have this at basically what Vegas had it as, which is a 5.5 win team. Like, could be a bowl team, but the right thing's breaking right, maybe not. As it is right now, obviously, it looks far different from that and far worse. I think, trying to assess it at this point is when everything is so bad, it's hard to, kind of diagnose. It seems
Yeah.
pervasive, and I think that's maybe part of it. They've changed practices from how they were under Chip Kelly, and everyone had their complications with Chip Kelly. I think he should have been fired last year.
Mm.
But one thing the man knew how to do was run a practice. And so it was rapid fire periods. And anybody who's watched a football practice knows guys get bored if you're doing the same thing for too long.
Yeah.
The energy starts to wilt. So it was 3 minute period, 3 minute period, 3 minute period, always doing a new and different thing because he understood we need to do it rapid fire. We need to rep a lot of different things, but we also need to keep it so guys are interested. With Deshaun Foster, what we're seeing is a lot of 10-minute periods, 12-minute
Mm.
periods, extensive periods of team stuff. Most practices you'll see a lot of individuals and then they'll do like maybe 2 or 3
Yeah.
periods of team stuff. We're seeing like half the practice is team stuff and there are these long drawn out periods of it. And I just wonder, and this is me speculating because you can't diagnose something so specific at this point because it's so broad, but I wonder if practice is playing into it, that they're not repping basics enough, not repping, in the game against Indiana, the first play of the game, it's an RPO where Garbers sees the throw before he has to put it in TJ Harden's belly. So he goes to throw, but TJ Harden runs into his elbow while he's while he's getting ready to throw without the ball ever having been in his belly. And I've literally never seen that fumble before. Like I've never
Yeah.
seen something like that. And I think that just comes from you didn't rep that enough. Like that didn't get repped enough in practice. And I just wonder if this all stems from maybe figuring out what kind of identity they want to have in practice and how that's going to translate to the team. But there are so many errors at this point. Defense is easier to diagnose, but offense right now, I think, is the main kind of not to put it too crassly, but the main WTF, like because there's so many breakdowns on the offensive line. There's so many breakdowns in receivers running into a bunch downfield where they're drawing in 4 defenders where there should only be one. And Ethan Garber's playing way below his talent level.
Well, I hate to do this to you. We will talk about the offense here, David. I mean, you mentioned Ethan Garber, a guy that has put up some numbers, and you mentioned it feels like this roster as a whole is just hasn't played like they did last year, and it hasn't been as advertised. Um, what are some of maybe the keys offensive? So just we'll start. What are some things that you would like to see this offense accomplish on Saturday, and maybe a couple of names LSU fans should keep an eye out for?
I would like to see the offensive line play a cohesive game. Against Hawaii in the opener, the pass protection was fine. And yes, the caveat is it's Hawaii. The pass protection was fine, but the run game broke down. They had missed assignments. No, they weren't able to climb. Some of these guys gained a lot of weight in the offseason to try to improve their strength, but it seems to have reduced mobility.
Mm.
But then against Indiana, the pass protection broke down, but the run game improved. What I'd like to see against LSU, and it's a little bit of a tall order because I know LSU's pass rush and havoc rate have been very good this year, but better on both ends. Have some good pass protection. Their 2 tackles were healthy this last game. They weren't in the opener. Ruben Anuje at left tackle, Garrett DeGiorgio. These are 2 really experienced guys. I'd like to see them protect Garbers pretty well and just give him time to make some decisions. I think, and I know that's so basic, but I'm really
Yeah.
looking for just something basic at this point. Because if they can settle Garbers down at the beginning of a game, give him something easy to do, it could change the complexion of the game for him. They've started disastrously the first 2 weeks, and I think it snowballs. I think for this offense, it's really got to start up front, good pass protection, and just open up lanes enough that your running backs can generate 3 or 4 yards without having to break 2 tackles to do so. And that hasn't been the case either. So I think it starts with the offensive line for UCLA.
That creates, I think, an intriguing storyline, David, because I was in Columbia last weekend for LSU South Carolina, and very early on, LSU did not get off to a good start in the trenches on both sides. And we kind of saw how that manifested into a 17-0 deficit and all the storylines that came out of that game. It is intriguing because one of the keys, I think, on our site we've talked about is we want to see how this defensive line builds off a second half performance where they're very good against South Carolina, but can you carry that into a team that maybe on paper you should have the advantage against, but do you play like it?
Mm-hmm.
Offensively, talk to us a little bit about the skill positions. LSU has still maturing, I will say, as a secondary, not the LSU of old that a lot of fans know, but just kind of talk to us about the skill position, maybe a couple names out there that we should be keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've seen because UCLA, in as much as it has an advantage, the receivers are pretty good. They've got some talent at receiver. J. Michael Sturdivant, 2 years ago in Bill Musgrave's terrible Cal offense, put up 65 catches for 755 yards. He is a real talent. Like he's 6'3" and he runs like a gazelle. Then Rico Flores transferred in from Notre Dame. He put up some real numbers in Notre Dame's kind of terrible offense from last year as a freshman. He came in as a transfer this offseason. He looked really good against Hawaii. He was kind of bottled up last week. And then Titus Mokiao Adamalala, who sat out practice today, so we'll see if he's ready to go on Saturday, but he's also a talent himself. There's some receiver talent. That's why I say it starts with pass protection. If they can protect Garbers and then he can play better, there's some weapons to throw the ball to. And I've seen the same thing you have with LSU's secondary. It's not quite the cornerback you of old. There's some opportunities, but it's too big ifs right here.
Yeah.
If the offensive line can protect against that, pretty fearsome pass rush at this point, and Ethan Garbers can deliver the ball downfield, yes, there's some guys who can catch it, but also, I mentioned it earlier, a lot of times these receivers are running routes into a bunch downfield. I think there's Eric Bieniemy came in the offseason as the offensive coordinator, and he brought a NFL system, and I think there has been a massive, massive learning curve for everyone involved on picking up that system.
That's interesting stuff. And obviously, fans, whether it's LSU or not, recognize that name and what he's done and how successful he's been. And it's an interesting storyline to obviously keep an eye on as well. And I like what you said too. Giving this offense the time to make decisions. It just sounds like they haven't had the time to. So it's kind of hard to really gauge, is this group good or not? Because offensive line has not given them time at times. So that'll be something to watch, obviously, on Saturday afternoon. Let's flip it over to the other side of the football where LSU, I'll tell you, kind of give you that perspective. The passing game has been very good. Garrett Nussmeier looks confident. The receiving core is emerging. Obviously, the big storyline coming in was Brian Thomas, Blake Neighbors are gone, Jay Daniels gone. Who is there? They've kind of answered some questions there. The run game picked up some steam last weekend. So, what is this LSU offense that may have found a run game last week in Columbia? What are they set to face on Saturday in UCLA's defense?
This is a little bit of an unknown. So today and yesterday at practice, UCLA's star defensive tackle, Jay Tawia, was not practicing. He's an NFL player. He'll be assuming he goes in the draft and, is able to play a little bit more this year. He's going to be a, top 3 round pick. And then Keanu Williams, the starter alongside him, hasn't been seen at practice since injuring himself against Indiana. So probably down 2 starting defensive tackles if I had to guess right now. So that's a concern, a major one. Aside from that, what I would say generally about UCLA's defense, the main problem they have so far is a lack of an edge rush. They don't have much of a base pass rush. Any pressure they're going to get is going to have to come from either elaborate trickery, like doing some weird stunts and some twists and kind of moving guys around, blitz, like bringing a linebacker from a weird spot and dropping a defensive end, or just pure, adding guys to the box and putting more pressure. But that's going to expose UCLA on the backside. Their cornerbacks, I would say it's probably the one group on the team where I would say they truly are under talented relative to where you would want a UCLA team to be. Jalen Davies is the number 1 corner. I think in an ideal world, he'd be number 3. Devin Kirkwood has a lot of ability, but he's really lacked consistency throughout his career, and he's now a senior. He'll have moments where you're like, oh, wow, he looks like a star, and then moments where it's almost like he forgets that they're running a route, and he, like against Indiana, he ran into the end zone when it was a stop fade. Guy caught the ball at the 3-yard line and was able to just kind of walk into the end zone. It's just, I think he loses awareness, loses consistency. So I think for UCLA in this matchup, It'll come down to hoping they have some health on the defensive tackle, being able to somehow stop the run, because I know what's his name, Caden
Caden Durham, yeah, the
Caden
freshman.
Durham. I know he had a big game against South Carolina and looked pretty good. Somehow keeping that bottled up more to the tune of what it was against USC and Nichols, and then hoping they can drop some guys into coverage against Nussmeier, because I think if you're sitting in man against Nussmeier, I think he'll pick them apart pretty easily, especially with those two all-world tackles protecting him.
Yeah, the pass pro has been very good
Yes.
for LSU, and I think that's something that even against a stout defensive line in South Carolina last week, they were kind of able to prove. And you mentioned the Caden Durham aspect. LSU found some success when they started to run more outside zone runs, so that's something I think they're going to want to build off of, and we'll see how
Here's a stat
UCLA
for you.
combats that.
You ready for a stat?
Let's
One
do
of
it.
UCLA's starting edges, Devin Apiu, he has yet to record a tackle this year.
So really a non-factor.
Yeah, and that's
wow.
that's I think indicative of what's kind of going on. UCLA had to replace its entire 3 deep at edge this offseason. Leatu Latu, the Murphy twins, Carl Jones, Jake Heimlicher, and Shea Bryant Strother. Like, even guys who were like scraping the bottom of the depth chart, they're gone. Some of them transferred out, but most of them graduated. So it's a whole new group. They tried to replace in the portal. Didn't. Edge rush, as everyone knows, is a very coveted thing in the portal. They weren't able to get high impact transfers. And, Devin, the guy I just mentioned, he's a converted defensive tackle playing edge. So it's outside runs. Those might have some success. I will say UCLA's strength on defense is linebacker. Kane Medrano has been very good this year. Femi Oladejo, he's a really good athlete. They can range, they can move. But once again, injury bug. Ale Cajo, LSU fans might remember him. He was originally at Alabama. He transferred into UCLA prior to 2021. He has spent the last 2 years injured, and then we saw him again today. He was in the weight room after playing the first 2 games, not participating in practice today. So we'll wait and see on that. But that's another rangy linebacker. But they've got a lot of depth and talent at linebacker. It's just, can you keep those offensive linemen off you?
It's going to be interesting, David. And this the final question we wrap all of these Behind Enemy Lines podcast with. You've kind of laid it out here to where if UCLA does pull off this upset, a lot of people are going to come back to this podcast and be like, David, you were so down on what would happen. But UCLA will win if. What has to happen? I know you've outlined a couple things you'd like to see, but really what has to happen for the Bruins to leave with what would sound like be not just a signature victory for Deshaun Foster early in his tenure, but really maybe a monumental victory for this program and their trajectory going forward?
Ruling out a very targeted meteor strike, I will go with this. UCLA needs to start off well, and I know that sounds kind of reductive and stupid, but hear me out. The last 2 games they've started out disaster ball on offense. They were quickly down 14-0 to Indiana after that bizarre fumble. They were quickly down 10-0 to Hawaii at halftime. Just they could not get out of their own way offensively. I think they need some confidence building at the beginning of this game. I think getting Garber some short throws that he can just connect on easily, that he doesn't have to sit there and just wonder, oh my God, is the post going to be open by the time I've got a rusher in my face? Like, what's going on? Just short, quick stuff. See if they can score on their opening drive. I think if they can do something where they're, looking productive in the first quarter, where they look like we can score on this team, I think it would be a load off. I don't think UCLA has much of a chance of winning, but I think there's an angle here to play a competitive game, and then in the fourth quarter, who knows what happens. But it's a narrow path. They've got to start hot. They've got to start where they're building some confidence rather than saying to themselves, "Oh no, here we go again." And I think if they can do that, and LSU's defense, we've talked about it, they're not a world beater. I think Indiana's maybe even a cut above defensively. Maybe they can get something going. I think that's got to be the hope at this point. It rests on the offense. I think the defense, even though it's performed a little bit better than the offense so far, I think it's more fundamentally flawed in a way that the offense maybe has some upside if they can figure some things out execution-wise.
It's going to be interesting. I know LSU fans, well, like we mentioned at the top of the show, both fans, I think fan base were excited about this home and home. And obviously the one out there was not exciting the way it ended for LSU fans, but it was a good matchup. And it was a back and forth game. It's just crazy how things have kind of gone. And also this, David, I think college football is better. And I think, well, for a lot of programs, you can say it's when UCLA is better. It's one of those brands that stands out. Obviously, the historical value that they bring, but also just getting back to where they need to be. And I know for LSU fans, they'd love to see them be good as well, but maybe hold off a week. Don't if
Well,
things could get ugly.
it's been about 26 years, so I think we can all wait another week or two.
I love it. David Woods, the Bruin Report online over there on 24/7 Sports, all part of a great network we have here. David, before we get you out of here, where can people follow you? And if they want some last minute tidbits on maybe more about what UCLA is and how this week could shape up, where can they find y'all's work?
Well, you can find us at Bruin Report online on 247, and then you can find me on Twitter at David Woods.
Awesome. David Woods, Bruin Report online, UCLA LSU getting ready to kick off here on Saturday. And this is another episode of Behind the Enemy Lines here on the Go 24/7 podcast.